The stagecoach lurched violently to one side as another gust of howling wind slammed against its wooden frame, and Zara Zimmerman gripped the edge of her seat so hard her knuckles turned white beneath her thin gloves. She had traveled all the way from Boston with nothing but a worn carpetbag, 3 letters from a man she had never met, and a promise of marriage that now seemed as fragile as the ice forming on the window beside her face. The driver shouted something incomprehensible through the storm, his words stolen by the blizzard that had descended upon the California mountains with unexpected fury. Zara had read about San Bernardino in those carefully penned letters, about the sunshine and the orange groves, about warm days and clear skies. But the reality that greeted her arrival in December of 1881 was a wall of white snow and biting cold that seemed determined to freeze her straight through to her bones. The other passengers had disembarked hours ago at various stops along the route, leaving her alone for the final stretch into town. She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders and tried not to think about what would happen if the cowboy who had sent for her did not show up to claim his mail-order bride. At 22 years old, she had left behind a life of servitude in a Boston boarding house, working herself to exhaustion for a woman who believed kindness was weakness and wages should be as small as possible. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like a miracle at the time, a chance for a fresh start in the West, a place where the sun supposedly always shone and opportunities grew as abundantly as the crops in the fertile valleys. Thomas Vance had written to her about his ranch on the outskirts of San Bernardino, about his need for a wife to help build a life together, about his desire for a family and a partner who would stand beside him through the challenges of frontier living. The stagecoach came to an abrupt halt, nearly throwing Zara from her seat. She heard the driver climbing down, his boots crunching in what must have been several inches of fresh snow. The door swung open, and a blast of frigid air rushed in, carrying with it a swirl of snowflakes that melted instantly on her cheeks like frozen tears. "This is as far as I can take you, miss," the driver said, his weathered face barely visible beneath the scarf wrapped around his head. "Town is just up ahead, but the horses cannot go any further in this mess. Can you walk?" Zara looked past him into the white void beyond, seeing nothing but the ghostly outlines of buildings barely visible through the curtain of falling snow. Her legs felt stiff from the long journey, and her feet were already numb inside her worn boots, but she had not come this far to give up now. She nodded and gathered her carpetbag, accepting the driver's gloved hand as she stepped down into snow that came up past her ankles. "There is a light up ahead," the driver pointed. "That should be the general store. They will help you find whoever you are looking for." Before Zara could thank him properly, he had already climbed back onto his perch, turning the stagecoach around with difficulty to begin his journey back to warmer, safer ground. She watched until the coach disappeared into the swirling snow, suddenly feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. The wind cut through her clothing as though she wore nothing at all, and she forced her feet to move forward, one step at a time, toward the faint glow of light that seemed impossibly far away. The snow fell faster now, accumulating on her eyelashes and making it difficult to see. Her carpetbag felt heavier with each step, and she wondered if she might actually freeze to death before reaching the safety of that distant building. She thought about the warm kitchen of the boarding house in Boston, how she had complained about the heat from the stoves while preparing endless meals for ungrateful guests. What she would give for that warmth now. Her breath came in short gasps, each inhalation burning her lungs with cold air, and her legs began to feel disconnected from her body, moving mechanically without conscious thought. Just when she thought she could not take another step, a figure emerged from the storm ahead of her. At first, she thought it might be a hallucination brought on by the cold, but then the figure solidified into the shape of a tall man wearing a heavy coat and a wide-brimmed hat covered in snow. He moved toward her with purposeful strides, closing the distance between them quickly. "Are you Zara Zimmerman?" His voice was deep and rough, carrying clearly despite the wind. She tried to answer, but her jaw felt frozen, her lips too stiff to form words properly. She managed a nod instead, and suddenly his strong hands were taking her carpet bag, and his arm was around her shoulders, supporting her weight as he guided her forward through the storm. "I am Thomas Vance. I have been watching for the stage for the past 3 hours. Can you walk?" "Yes," she managed to whisper, though in truth she was not certain. Her legs moved because he was essentially carrying her, his solid presence the only thing keeping her upright. The light she had been struggling toward grew brighter, and then they were climbing wooden steps and passing through a doorway into warmth so sudden and intense it was almost painful. "Good Lord, Thomas, is that her?" A woman's voice spoke from somewhere beyond the ringing in Zara's ears. "Get her by the fire immediately. She is half frozen." Zara felt herself being guided across a room, and then she was being lowered onto something soft near a source of heat that made her skin prickle and sting. She blinked, trying to clear her vision, and gradually her surroundings came into focus. She was sitting on a chair that had been pulled close to a large stone fireplace, where flames danced and crackled, throwing blessed warmth into the room. A woman with graying hair and kind eyes was unwrapping the frozen shawl from around her shoulders while Thomas Vance knelt before her, carefully removing her wet boots. "My name is Margaret Sullivan," the woman said gently. "My husband and I run the general store here. You just sit still and let yourself warm up slowly. Thomas, get her something hot to drink." Zara watched as the cowboy who was supposed to become her husband moved with surprising grace for such a large man, pouring something steaming from a pot that sat near the fire. He brought it to her, and their eyes met properly for the first time. He had a strong face, weathered by sun and wind, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar and eyes the color of summer grass flecked with gold. He looked to be perhaps 26 or 27, and there was something solid and dependable about him that made her feel marginally less terrified about her situation. "Drink this," he said, pressing the warm cup into her hands. "It is just coffee with some honey. It will help." Her hands shook so badly that he had to help her guide the cup to her lips. The coffee was strong and sweet, and as it slid down her throat, she felt warmth begin to spread through her chest. She took another sip, then another, and gradually sensation began to return to her extremities. Unfortunately, sensation brought pain with it. Her feet and hands felt as though thousands of needles were stabbing into them, and she could not suppress a small gasp. "That is good," Margaret said, rubbing Zara's hands gently between her own. "The pain means nothing is seriously frozen. You are going to be fine, dear." "I am sorry," Zara managed to say, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar to her own ears. "I did not expect snow. Your letters mentioned sunshine." Thomas had the grace to look embarrassed. "We usually have sunshine. This storm came out of nowhere. It has been years since we had a blizzard like this in December. I am sorry you had to arrive in such terrible conditions." Now that feeling was returning to her body, Zara became acutely aware of how she must look. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung in wet tangles around her face. Her dress was soaked through and muddy at the hem. She probably resembled a drowned rat more than a prospective bride. She set the coffee cup down on a small table beside her chair and tried to smooth her hair with trembling fingers. "Let me show you to the back room," Margaret said. "I have some dry clothes you can borrow, and you can warm yourself properly. Thomas, you stay out here." "I will be staying in town tonight anyway," Thomas said. "The ranch is too far to reach in this weather. I got a room at the boarding house down the street." "Miss Zimmerman can stay here with you and your husband, if that is acceptable." "Of course it is acceptable," Margaret said firmly. "Come along, dear." Zara stood on shaky legs and followed Margaret through a curtained doorway into a small living area behind the store. Margaret bustled about, gathering clothing and towels, chattering in a comfortable way that required no response. She helped Zara out of her wet clothes, clucking sympathetically at how thin she was, and provided a basin of warm water for washing. The dry dress she offered was simple but clean, made of soft flannel in a practical brown color. It was slightly too large, but Margaret pinned it quickly to fit better. "There now," Margaret said, brushing out Zara's long hair and braiding it loosely. "You look much more yourself. Are you feeling better?" "Yes, thank you," Zara said, surprised to find it was true. The warmth and kindness had done as much to revive her as the fire and dry clothes. "Everyone has been so generous. I expected to go directly to the ranch." Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. "I am sure Thomas explained in his letters that he wanted to be married as soon as you arrived. We have a circuit preacher who comes through town, but with this storm, I do not know when that might be. You will stay with my husband and me until the weather clears and we can sort things out properly. There is no rush, despite what men might think." Zara felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. She had prepared herself for an immediate marriage, for becoming a wife to a stranger without delay. The postponement gave her breathing room but also prolonged the uncertainty. "Thomas seems like a good man," she said carefully. "He is one of the best," Margaret assured her. "His father started the ranch 30 years ago, and Thomas has been running it since his parents passed 5 years ago. He works hard and treats people fairly. He has been lonely, though, I think. A ranch is a lot for one man to manage alone, and he wants a family. He wrote to you honestly about his circumstances." "Yes," Zara said. "He was very clear about what he was looking for, a partner, not a servant, someone who could work alongside him and build a life together. He said he wanted honesty and kindness more than beauty or accomplishment." Margaret smiled. "That sounds like Thomas. Come, let us return to the fire. You should eat something. I imagine you have not had a proper meal in days." They returned to the main room where Thomas still stood near the fireplace, staring into the flames with a thoughtful expression. He turned as they entered, and Zara saw his eyes widen slightly as he took in her improved appearance. Something flickered in his expression, something that might have been appreciation or perhaps relief. "You look much better," he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. "I was worried you might catch pneumonia or worse." "Thanks to you, I did not," Zara replied. "If you had not come out into the storm to meet the stage, I do not know what would have happened." He shrugged as though it were nothing. "I gave my word I would be here when you arrived. A man keeps his word, no matter the weather." Margaret's husband appeared from somewhere in the back, a barrel-chested man with a full beard and a booming laugh. He introduced himself as Henry Sullivan and insisted that everyone sit down to a meal of stew and fresh bread. They gathered around a table near the fire, and for a while the only sounds were the crackling of burning wood and the howling of wind outside. The stew was thick and hearty, filled with vegetables and chunks of tender beef, and Zara ate with an appetite she had not felt in months. As the meal progressed, conversation flowed more easily. Thomas asked about her journey, and she told him about the long train ride across the country, about the changing landscape outside the windows, about the other passengers and their various destinations. He listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. In turn, she asked about the ranch and the town, about what her life might be like in this strange new place. San Bernardino is growing fast, Thomas explained. We have got rail connections now, and people are moving here from all over. The land is good for cattle and crops when we get rain, though water can be scarce in summer. The mountains you see when the weather is clear are beautiful, and there are hot springs not far from the ranch where the air smells of sage and wild flowers. It is different from Boston, I imagine. Very different, Zara agreed, but I wanted different. I wanted a chance to be more than what I was. Something in her tone must have conveyed the years of struggle and limitation, because Thomas's expression softened. You will have that chance here, he said quietly. I promise you that, whatever you decide about our arrangement. Even if you choose not to marry me, I will make sure you have opportunities. You did not come all this way to be trapped in another difficult situation. His words surprised her. She had expected pressure, perhaps even demands. After all, he had paid for her passage west and had surely told people a bride was arriving. But instead, he offered her choice, and that generosity touched something deep inside her chest. That is kind of you, she said, but I came here intending to honor our agreement. I would like to know you better before we marry, but I did not travel across the country to change my mind. He nodded slowly. Then we will take the time to know each other. There is no point in rushing into a marriage that makes us both miserable. My parents loved each other truly, and I saw how that love made everything else in life easier to bear. I want that kind of partnership if possible. So do I, Zara said, meeting his eyes directly. In the firelight, his face looked honest and open, and she felt the first stirring of something beyond mere hope. Perhaps this wild gamble might actually work out after all. The storm raged outside for 3 more days, trapping everyone in town with nowhere to go and nothing to do but wait. Zara stayed in the small room behind the general store, helping Margaret with cooking and cleaning to earn her keep despite the older woman's protests that she was a guest. Thomas came by every day, sometimes staying for hours, talking with her by the fire while the snow continued to fall outside. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the time he had gotten lost in the hills for 2 days when he was 8 years old, and his mother had nearly gone mad with worry. She told him about her childhood in a Boston orphanage, about the strict matrons and the constant cold, about the way she had taught herself to read by candlelight after everyone else had gone to sleep. They discovered they both loved books, though opportunities to acquire new ones were rare for both of them. They both enjoyed riding, though her experience was limited to a few stolen moments on a neighbor's old mare. They both wanted children, a house full of noise and laughter and life. On the second day of the storm, Thomas brought a checkerboard and taught her to play. They sat across from each other at the table, the fire warming their backs, moving pieces and arguing good-naturedly about the rules. Margaret and Henry watched with knowing smiles, remembering perhaps their own courtship many years before. On the third day, Thomas brought his guitar, an instrument his father had taught him to play, and sang songs in a surprisingly pleasant baritone voice. Zara found herself laughing at the funny verses and moved by the sad ballads, watching his fingers move skillfully across the strings. "You have a beautiful voice," she said, when he finished a particularly haunting melody about a cowboy who died far from home. He looked embarrassed but pleased. "My mother used to say music makes hard work easier. I sing to the cattle sometimes when I am out riding the range. They seem to like it." "I would like to hear that someday," Zara said. "You singing to the cattle under the stars." His eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You will," he promised. "When the weather clears and we can go to the ranch, I will show you everything. The whole spread, from the creek in the north pasture to the hills in the south where the wild mustangs run. You will love it, Zara. I know you will." The way he said her name, with such certainty and warmth, made her heart beat faster. She had been so focused on survival for so long, on just getting through each day, that she had forgotten what it felt like to look forward to something. Now, sitting in the warm glow of firelight with this solid, kind man across from her, she felt hope unfurling inside her chest like a flower opening to the sun. On the morning of the fourth day, Zara woke to silence. The constant howling of wind had stopped, and pale sunlight streamed through the small window of her room. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Thomas already there, standing at the front window of the store with Henry, both men assessing the conditions outside. "The storm has passed," Thomas said when he saw her. "The main roads should be passable by tomorrow. I am going to head back to the ranch today to check on things and make sure the animals weathered the storm safely. I will return in 3 days to escort you out there if you are still willing." "I am willing," Zara said firmly. "More than willing." He smiled then, a genuine expression of happiness that transformed his usually serious face. "Good. That makes me very glad. Margaret, can you help her get whatever supplies she might need? Clothing suitable for ranch work, anything she wants to make the house more comfortable. Put it all on my account." "Thomas, that is too generous," Zara protested, but he shook his head. "You are going to be my wife. It is only right that I provide for you properly. Besides, you cannot work on a ranch in fancy dresses. You need practical things. Please let me do this." The look in his eyes made it clear this was important to him, a matter of pride and responsibility. Zara nodded, accepting gracefully. "Thank you, I will be sensible with your money." "I trust you," he said simply. And then he was gathering his coat and hat, preparing to venture out into the snow-covered world beyond the store's walls. At the door he paused and looked back at her. 3 days, Zara. Then we start our life together properly." 3 days, she agreed, and watched him disappear into the brilliant whiteness outside. Those 3 days passed in a flurry of activity. Margaret proved to be an excellent guide, helping Zara select sturdy work dresses, warm coats, practical boots, and all the small necessities a woman needed for frontier living. They bought fabric for making curtains and quilts, seeds for starting a kitchen garden in spring, jars and preserves for the pantry. Margaret shared advice about managing a ranch house, about cooking for hungry ranch hands, about the 1,000 small tasks that filled a woman's day in the West. "The most important thing," Margaret said as they folded the new clothes and packed them into a trunk Thomas had provided, "is to remember you are partners. This is not Boston, where men and women live in separate spheres. Out here, everyone works together or nobody survives. Thomas will need you, truly need you, and you will need him just as much. Build that partnership strong from the beginning and everything else will follow." Zara absorbed this wisdom, recognizing its truth. She had seen marriages in Boston that were really just business arrangements, where husband and wife barely spoke to each other beyond necessities. She did not want that kind of hollow existence. She wanted what she had glimpsed in these few days with Thomas, a genuine connection that could grow into something deep and lasting. On the evening before Thomas was due to return, the circuit preacher arrived in town, half frozen and full of apologies for being delayed by the storm. Margaret immediately sent word to the ranch, and Thomas rode back into town the next morning with the sun barely above the horizon. He looked tired and wind-burned but happy, and when he took Zara's hands in his own, she felt the calluses and strength of a working man. "The preacher is here," he said. "We could be married today if you want, or we can wait longer if you need more time." Zara thought about everything she had learned about this man in the past week. She thought about his kindness, his honesty, his willingness to give her choice even when he did not have to. She thought about the way he sang and the sound of his laughter and the quiet strength that seemed to emanate from him like warmth from a fire. Most of all, she thought about how she felt when she was near him, safe and valued and full of possibility. "Today," she said. "I want to marry you today, Thomas Vance." The ceremony took place in the general store that afternoon with Margaret and Henry as witnesses. The preacher was an elderly man with kind eyes who kept the service simple and heartfelt. Zara wore the best of her new dresses, a deep blue wool that Margaret had helped her alter to fit perfectly. Thomas wore a clean shirt and a vest, his dark hair still damp from washing, and when he said his vows, his voice never wavered. "I promise to respect you, to work beside you, to provide for you and protect you as best I can. I promise to be honest with you always, to listen when you speak, to value your thoughts and your feelings. I promise to try to be a good husband, even when I fail, and to love you more with each passing day." When it was Zara's turn, she found her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I promise to stand beside you in all things, to work hard and support you, to be honest even when the truth is difficult. I promise to build a home with you, to be a true partner, and to grow with you into whatever we are meant to become." The preacher pronounced them married, and Thomas kissed her gently, briefly, a promise of things to come rather than a demand. Everyone applauded, and Margaret dabbed at her eyes with her apron, and Henry produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They shared a toast and a simple meal, and then suddenly it was time to leave, to begin the journey to what was now Zara's home. The ride to the ranch took most of the afternoon. The roads were muddy from melting snow but passable, and Thomas kept the wagon moving at a steady pace. Zara sat beside him on the bench, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching the landscape unfold around them. The storm had transformed everything into a strange winter wonderland that seemed impossible for Southern California. Snow still clung to the branches of trees and covered the distant mountains in gleaming white, but she could see hints of the golden hills and green valleys beneath, promises of the beauty that normally characterized this place. Thomas pointed out landmarks as they traveled. The creek where the cattle came to drink, the stand of oak trees that marked the eastern boundary of his land, the rocky outcropping where eagles nested in spring. He spoke with obvious love for this land, and Zara found herself drawn into his enthusiasm, imagining herself becoming part of this place, putting down roots after years of drifting. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, they crested a small rise, and Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop. "There," he said, pointing ahead. "That is home." Zara looked and saw a collection of buildings nestled in a protected valley. The main house was built of wood and stone, larger than she had expected, with a wide porch and windows that caught the last rays of sunlight. Behind it stood a barn, several corrals and smaller structures that must be bunkhouses and storage sheds. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see the shapes of cattle in the near pastures, dark against the white snow. "It is beautiful," she breathed and meant it. There was something solid and permanent about the place, something that spoke of hard work and careful planning and a vision of the future. "Wait until you see it in spring," Thomas said, pride evident in his voice. "When the wildflowers bloom and the grass turns green and the calves are running in the fields. It is the most beautiful place in the world then." He clicked his tongue to the horses, and the wagon rolled forward again, covering the last distance to their destination. As they pulled up in front of the house, the door opened and a man emerged, lean and weathered with gray streaking his dark hair. He raised a hand in greeting. "Welcome back, boss," the man called. "We kept things running while you were gone. Lost 2 head of cattle to the cold, but the rest made it through fine." "Thank you, Miguel," Thomas said, climbing down from the wagon and then turning to help Zara descend. "This is my wife, Zara. Zara, this is Miguel Torres. He has been working this ranch since my father's time. He knows more about cattle than any man alive." Miguel removed his hat and nodded respectfully. "Welcome, Senora Vance. It is good to have a lady at the ranch again. The house has been too quiet for too long." "Thank you," Zara said, liking him immediately. There was warmth in his dark eyes and genuine welcome in his weathered face. "Miguel, can you help me unload the wagon?" Thomas asked. "Then you can head back to the bunkhouse. We will talk about the storm damage in the morning." The 2 men worked together to carry Zara's trunk and the various supplies into the house while she stood on the porch, suddenly nervous now that the moment had arrived. She was married to a man she barely knew, about to enter a house that was supposed to be her home, about to begin a life completely different from anything she had known before. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the porch railing. Then Thomas was beside her, Miguel having departed with a final friendly wave. "Ready?" he asked gently. "Ready," she said, though her voice came out smaller than she intended. He opened the door and gestured for her to enter first. She stepped across the threshold into warmth and light. The interior of the house was simple but well made, with plastered walls and sturdy wooden furniture. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace similar to the one in the general store, providing heat and a place for cooking. Doorways led off to what must be bedrooms, and a ladder against one wall climbed to a loft space above. "My parents built this house to last," Thomas said, moving past her to add wood to the fire. "They wanted room for a family to grow. The main bedroom is through that door. There is a smaller room that was mine as a boy, and the loft has space for more children when they come. The furniture is old but solid. You can change anything you want, arrange things however suits you. This is your home now, too." Zara walked slowly through the space, running her fingers along the smooth surface of a table, examining the neat shelves that held dishes and cooking supplies, peering into the bedroom where a large bed frame stood covered with what looked like a handmade quilt. Everything was clean and orderly, cared for despite the absence of a woman's touch. "You keep a neat house," she observed. Thomas looked embarrassed. "Miguel's wife, Rosa, has been coming once a week to help with cleaning and laundry. She offered to come tomorrow to help you settle in if you would like. She is a good woman. I think you will like her." "I would appreciate that," Zara said. She turned to face him, suddenly aware that they were alone together, married, and nightfall was approaching. Her heart began to beat faster. He must have seen something in her expression because his own face softened. "Zara, I want you to understand something. This marriage is real and legal, but I am not going to demand anything from you that you are not ready to give. We can take time to know each other better, to become comfortable with each other. You can sleep in the small bedroom until you want to share the main one. There is no rush." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a confusing twist of disappointment. "You are very patient," she said carefully. "I am practical," he corrected. "I want a real marriage, a partnership built on trust and affection, not duty and obligation. That takes time." He moved closer, reaching out to take her hand. "But I want you to know, Zara, that I am already glad you are here. These past few days getting to know you have been some of the happiest I have had in years. I think we can be good together, if we are both willing to try." His hand was warm around hers, strong and solid and reassuring. She looked up into his face and saw sincerity there along with something else, something that might have been the beginning of deeper feelings. "I think so too," she said quietly. "And Thomas, I do not want to sleep in the small bedroom. We are married. I want to try to be truly married, even if we are still learning about each other." His eyes widened slightly, and she saw surprise and pleasure chase across his features. "Are you certain?" "I am certain," she said, and realized it was true. She trusted this man who had warmed her frozen body by the fire and spent days talking with her and promised her partnership, rather than demanding servitude. She wanted to take this leap of faith with him. He lifted her hand and kissed it gently. "Then let me make us some dinner, and we will spend our first evening together properly, as husband and wife." They worked together to prepare a simple meal of bacon and beans with fresh biscuits that Thomas proved surprisingly skilled at making. As they cooked and ate, conversation flowed easily, the nervousness gradually fading into something more comfortable. He told her about the plans he had for the ranch, about wanting to improve the breeding stock and build better water systems for the dry summer months. She told him about her dreams of having a garden full of vegetables and flowers, about learning to ride well enough to explore the hills he had described, about filling this house with children and laughter. "How many children do you want?" he asked as they cleaned the dishes together. "As many as God sends us," she said. "I grew up alone. I want our children to have brothers and sisters to never feel the loneliness I felt." "I grew up alone too," he said. "My mother had difficult pregnancies. I was their only child, and I think they wanted more, but it never happened. I would like a big family if we are blessed with one." When the kitchen was clean and the fire banked for the night, Thomas led her to the bedroom. It was simply furnished with the large bed, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin for washing. A lamp cast warm light across the quilt, and Zara recognized the pattern as a wedding ring design, dozens of interlocking circles in shades of blue and gold. "My mother made that quilt," Thomas said quietly. "She finished it shortly before she died. I think she knew somehow that someday I would marry, and she wanted to leave something for my bride." Zara reached out and touched the quilt, running her fingers over the careful stitches. She could feel the love that had gone into every piece of fabric, every measured cut and precise seam. "It is beautiful. I will treasure it." Thomas began to undress, and Zara realized she needed to do the same. She turned away, suddenly shy, fumbling with the buttons of her dress. She heard the rustle of fabric behind her and knew he was removing his own clothes. When she finally managed to get down to her chemise and drawers, she climbed quickly under the quilt, grateful for its coverage. The bed shifted as Thomas joined her, and she felt the heat of his body even though several inches separated them. The lamp still burned on the table, casting their shadows on the wall. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, the awkwardness returning now that they were lying together in the dark. "Zara," Thomas said finally, his voice low, "we do not have to do anything tonight." "I meant what I said about taking time." She rolled onto her side to face him, her eyes adjusting enough to see his features in the lamplight. "I know you meant it. That is part of why I want to try. You have been kind and patient and honest with me from the beginning. I want to be brave enough to meet you halfway." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he cupped her cheek with his calloused hand. "You are the bravest woman I have ever met. You traveled across the country to marry a stranger. You stepped off that stage into a blizzard. You said yes to a life you could not possibly have imagined. That takes more courage than most people have." His words warmed her from the inside, chasing away the last of her fear. She leaned forward and kissed him, tentatively at first, and then with more confidence when he responded gently. His arms came around her, pulling her closer, and she felt the solid strength of him against her body. The kiss deepened, and warmth began to bloom inside her, a different kind of warmth than the fire had provided, this one coming from within. They came together that night with tenderness and care, learning the shape and feel of each other, discovering what brought pleasure and what required patience. Thomas was gentle, attentive to her responses, and when she felt brief pain, he held her close and whispered reassurances until it passed and became something else entirely. Afterward they lay tangled together beneath his mother's quilt, hearts beating in rhythm, and Zara thought that perhaps she had already begun to fall in love with her husband. The weeks that followed established the rhythm of their new life together. Zara rose before dawn each morning to start the fire and prepare breakfast, while Thomas went out to feed the animals and check on the cattle. Rosa Torres came to the house 3 times a week, teaching Zara how to manage the specific challenges of ranch housekeeping, and the 2 women quickly became friends despite the difference in their ages. Miguel and the 3 other ranch hands who worked for Thomas treated Zara with respect and appreciation for the good meals she provided, and the small touches of comfort she brought to their rough existence. As the snow melted and January gave way to February, Zara began to see the truth of what Thomas had promised. The land revealed itself as the white covering receded, showing golden hills dotted with oak trees and valleys lush with winter grass. The cattle grew fat on the abundant feed, and the sounds of lowing calves filled the air as spring approached. Thomas taught her to ride properly on a gentle mare named Daisy, and they spent Sunday afternoons exploring the ranch together, with him pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his childhood. One such Sunday, they rode to the hot springs he had mentioned, following a narrow trail through hills covered in wildflowers just beginning to bloom. The springs lay in a protected canyon where steam rose in wispy columns, and the air smelled of minerals and sage. They sat on smooth rocks worn by centuries of water, watching birds flit among the willows that grew along the spring's edge. "I used to come here when I was a boy," Thomas said, his arm around her shoulders. "When things felt too big or too hard, when I missed my parents, when I just needed to think. There is something peaceful about this place." "It is perfect," Zara agreed, leaning into his warmth. "Thank you for sharing it with me." He turned her face toward his and kissed her, long and deep, and she felt the now familiar stirring of desire. They had been married for 6 weeks, and the physical side of their relationship had grown easier and more pleasurable with each passing night. But it was more than just physical attraction that bound them together. It was the conversations they shared over dinner about dreams and fears and plans for the future. It was the way he listened when she spoke and valued her opinions about everything from cattle breeding to which color to paint the bedroom. It was the way she had learned to read his moods, to know when he needed comfort or encouragement or simply silent companionship. "I love you," he said against her lips, the words spilling out as though they could no longer be contained. "I know it has not been long, but I love you, Zara. You have brought light into this house and into my life. I cannot imagine being without you now." Joy exploded inside her chest, bright and overwhelming. "I love you too," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I think I have been falling in love with you since that first night when you carried me through the storm. You saved me, Thomas, in more ways than you know." They held each other close, the warm spring air wrapping around them like a benediction, and Zara knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. By April, Zara was certain she was pregnant. She waited to tell Thomas until she was absolutely sure, hugging the secret to herself like a precious gift. When she finally told him one evening after dinner, His reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, his face alight with pure happiness. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "In late autumn, I think," she said, her hands on her still flat stomach. "November or early December." He knelt in front of her, pressing his ear to her belly as though he might hear the tiny heartbeat within. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa, and I already love you more than you can imagine." Watching him, seeing the tenderness in his face and the wonder in his eyes, Zara felt her heart expand with love so intense it was almost painful. This man, who had been a stranger 7 months ago, was now her entire world. And together, they were creating new life, new possibilities, a future that stretched out before them full of promise. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the discomforts and challenges. Rosa proved to be a wealth of knowledge about prenatal care and childbirth, and Margaret made the trip out from town several times to check on Zara and bring supplies. Thomas became almost comically protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or work too hard, until she finally had to remind him that ranch women had been having babies for generations without requiring complete bed rest. "I am growing a baby, not dying of consumption," she told him with exasperated affection. "I need to keep moving and working or I will go mad from boredom." He relented, but continued to watch over her with devoted concern, and she found his protectiveness endearing rather than annoying. As summer arrived with its dry heat and cloudless skies, they worked together to prepare the small bedroom for the baby, whitewashing the walls and building a cradle from smooth pine wood. Zara sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands creating soft things for the child she could not wait to meet. The ranch prospered that year. The cattle sale in summer brought excellent prices, and Thomas was able to purchase additional land and improve the water systems as he had planned. He hired 2 more hands to help with the expanded operation, and the ranch began to feel less like a struggling enterprise and more like a thriving business. Zara managed the household accounts with careful efficiency, stretching every dollar and finding ways to save money without sacrificing quality or comfort. In September, unexpected tragedy struck when word came that Henry Sullivan had died suddenly of heart failure. Zara and Thomas made the trip to town for the funeral, and Zara held Margaret while the older woman wept for her husband of 40 years. In the weeks that followed, it became clear that Margaret could not run the general store alone, and she made the difficult decision to sell it and move to San Francisco where her sister lived. "Come visit us," Margaret said when she stopped at the ranch to say goodbye. "Bring the baby when it arrives. I want to meet your little one and spoil it terribly." "We will," Zara promised, embracing her tightly. "Thank you for everything you did for me when I arrived. You were the first person to show me kindness here, and I will never forget that." After Margaret left, Zara felt the loss keenly. The older woman had become like a mother to her, and saying goodbye reopened old wounds about the family she had never had. Thomas held her while she cried, understanding without needing explanation, and that night they talked long into the darkness about family and loss and the preciousness of the connections we make. "Our children will have family," Thomas promised. "They will have us and each other, and we will build something strong enough to last for generations. Your loneliness ends here, Zara. I swear it." November arrived with cooler temperatures and the return of rain to the parched land. Zara grew large and uncomfortable, her belly enormous with the child she carried. Rosa came to stay at the ranch as the due date approached, preparing everything necessary for a home birth. Thomas paced nervously, jumping at every sound, convinced that labor would begin at any moment. When it finally did start, on a gray afternoon with rain drumming steadily on the roof, Zara was almost relieved. The waiting was over, and soon she would meet the baby she had been carrying for so long. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into the following morning. Thomas stayed with her despite Rosa's initial protests that men did not belong in birthing rooms, holding her hand and encouraging her through each contraction. "You can do this," he told her over and over. "You are strong enough. Just a little longer." When the baby finally emerged with a lusty cry, Rosa held up a squirming, red-faced infant and announced, "You have a son. A son." Zara reached out with trembling arms and Rosa placed the baby on her chest, still slippery and warm from birth. She looked down at the tiny face, the dark hair plastered to his skull, the miniature fingers already grasping at air, and felt love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Zara, you did it. He is perfect." They named him James Henry, after Thomas's father, and after Henry Sullivan, who had shown them both such kindness. James proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who nursed well and slept in increasingly longer stretches. Zara marveled at every tiny detail, from his impossibly small fingernails to the way his nose wrinkled when he yawned. Thomas was a devoted father, taking turns walking the floor when James fussed at night and changing diapers without complaint. "I never knew I could feel like this," Thomas said one evening, cradling his sleeping son against his chest. "Like my heart is walking around outside my body. How do parents ever survive the fear of something happening to their children?" "The same way we survive everything else," Zara said, leaning against his shoulder and looking down at their baby. Together. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by hard work and steady growth. The ranch continued to prosper, expanding until Thomas employed 8 full-time hands and managed one of the larger cattle operations in the region. Zara proved to have a knack for business, taking over more of the financial management and finding ways to increase profits through careful planning and smart investments. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. When he was 2 years old, Zara gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Sarah, who arrived together in the early morning hours of a June day, surprising everyone with their coordinated entrance into the world. The twins were mirror opposites in personality, Emma bold and adventurous while Sarah was cautious and contemplative, but they were inseparable from birth. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Daniel Thomas. Daniel was a happy, easy baby who smiled at everyone and seemed to find joy in the smallest things. The house Thomas's parents had built was finally filled with the noise and laughter of children, and barely a moment passed in silence. Zara had never been happier. Her days were exhausting, filled with cooking and cleaning and childcare and ranch management, but they were also deeply satisfying. She had everything she had dreamed of during those lonely years in Boston, and more than she had dared to hope for when she stepped off that stagecoach into a blizzard. She had a partner who loved and respected her, children who brought joy to every day, work that mattered and made a difference. One evening when James was 8 and the twins were 6 and Daniel was 4, the family gathered around the dinner table for their evening meal. It had been a good day, productive and peaceful, and Zara looked around at the faces she loved most in the world. Thomas caught her eye and smiled, that same warm smile that still made her heart skip after more than 9 years of marriage. "I have been thinking," Thomas said after the children had been sent to wash up and prepare for bed. "Maybe we should take a trip to San Francisco next spring. Visit Margaret, let the children see the ocean. We can afford it now, and I think it would be good for all of us to have an adventure together." "I think that is a wonderful idea," Zara agreed. "James is old enough to remember it, and the others would love it. Margaret has been begging us to visit for years." "It is settled then," Thomas said, pulling her into his arms. "Next spring, the whole family travels to San Francisco, but life has a way of changing plans in unexpected ways." That winter, Zara discovered she was pregnant again, and by spring she was too far along to make such a long journey comfortably. They postponed the trip, promising the disappointed children they would go the following year instead. In August, Zara gave birth to another son, whom they named Peter Michael. The birth was harder than the previous ones, leaving Zara weak and exhausted, and Rosa insisted she needed more time to recover than she had allowed herself after the other babies. "You are not as young as you were when James was born," Rosa said bluntly. "And 5 children take their toll on a woman's body. You need to rest properly this time." Zara tried to follow Rosa's advice, but it was difficult with 4 other children demanding attention and a ranch to help manage. Thomas hired a young woman from town to help with the housework and childcare, which eased some of the burden, but Zara still found herself exhausted by the end of each day. As Peter grew from infant to toddler, however, Zara's strength returned. By the time he was a year old, she felt like herself again, energetic and capable. The family finally made their long-delayed trip to San Francisco, traveling by train in relative comfort compared to the stagecoach journey that had brought Zara west all those years ago. Margaret had grown elderly but was still sharp and funny, delighting in the children and spoiling them exactly as she had promised. They spent 2 weeks in the city, seeing the sights and enjoying the break from ranch routine. The children were enchanted by the ocean, spending hours playing in the waves and collecting shells on the beach. Zara and Thomas stole moments alone when they could, walking hand in hand through the city streets and feeling young again. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked one evening as they stood on a pier watching the sun set over the water. "Answering my advertisement, coming all the way out here to marry a stranger." Zara looked up at him, seeing the gray that now streaked his dark hair and the lines that years of sun and wind had etched around his eyes. She thought about everything they had built together, the life they had created through hard work and determination and love. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "That frozen, terrified girl who arrived in a blizzard was given the greatest gift imaginable. She found home. She found love. She found everything she had been searching for her entire life." He kissed her then, sweet and tender, and she tasted salt air and promise on his lips. Behind them, their children's laughter rang out across the beach, and Zara knew with absolute certainty that this was what happiness felt like. They returned to the ranch renewed and refreshed, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. The children grew and thrived, each developing their own distinct personality and talents. James proved to have his father's way with animals, and a natural leadership ability that suggested he would run the ranch well when his time came. The twins were opposite in their interests as they were in personality, Emma drawn to riding and outdoor work while Sarah preferred books and quieter pursuits. Daniel showed a talent for music, teaching himself to play his father's old guitar by ear. Peter, the baby, was still too young to show clear inclinations, but he adored his older siblings and followed them everywhere. When Zara was 40 years old and Thomas 44, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that drew friends and neighbors from all over the region. The ranch house that had once seemed so large now felt almost too small to contain the crowd. Miguel and Rosa, both aging but still vital, toasted to the young couple they had watched become a formidable partnership. Former ranch hands who had moved on to other opportunities came back to pay their respects. Business associates who had learned to respect Zara's sharp mind and Thomas's fair dealing raised glasses in honor of 2 decades of success. As Zara stood on the porch watching the celebration, her youngest child asleep against her shoulder and her older children playing music for the dancers, she thought about that terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach into a blizzard 20 years ago. That woman had been so alone, so desperate for something better, so willing to gamble everything on the hope of finding a place to belong. Thomas appeared beside her, sliding an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about? How lucky I am," she said simply. How one decision, one leap of faith changed everything. "I am the lucky one," he countered. "I wrote to 5 women before you. 4 of them turned me down or changed their minds. If even one of them had said yes, I would never have met you. I would never have had this life." She turned to face him fully, looking into the eyes she knew as well as her own. "We found each other when we both needed finding. That is not luck, Thomas. That is destiny." He kissed her forehead, his lips warm against her skin. "Whatever it was, I am grateful for it every single day." The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of ranch life and the gradual maturing of their children. James began taking on more responsibility for the ranch operations, learning everything Thomas could teach him about cattle breeding and land management, and dealing fairly with employees. At 18, he was already taller than his father and commanded respect from men twice his age. The twins, at 16, were beautiful young women who had attracted the attention of several young men in the region, though neither seemed in any rush to marry. Emma worked alongside her brother, proving herself as capable as any man at ranch work. Sarah had become the teacher for the small school that had been established in the growing community, educating the children of ranch families and townspeople alike. Daniel, at 14, had developed his musical talent to the point where he was invited to play at dances and gatherings throughout the region. He spoke of traveling to San Francisco or even New York to study music seriously. And while Thomas struggled with the idea of his son leaving the ranch, Zara encouraged Daniel to follow his passion. "We left our old lives to build something new," she reminded Thomas. "We cannot expect our children to stay simply because it is what we want. We have to let them find their own paths." Peter, at 10, was still young enough to be undecided about his future, content to tag along with whichever sibling would let him and cause mischief when he could get away with it. When Zara turned 45, she and Thomas made the difficult decision to stop having children. 5 was a blessing beyond measure, and they wanted to focus on helping their existing children build successful lives rather than starting over with infants at their age. It was a bittersweet decision, marking the end of one phase of life, but it also opened up new possibilities for the future. With the children requiring less constant supervision, Zara became more involved in community affairs. She helped establish a women's organization that provided support for widows and struggling families. She worked with the town council on improvements to roads and public facilities. She became known as a woman of influence and substance, someone whose opinion carried weight and whose assistance could make a real difference. Thomas remained her partner in everything, supporting her endeavors and often contributing resources from the ranch to help with community projects. Their marriage had deepened over the years into something that went beyond romance or partnership, into a profound understanding and connection that required no words. They could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, could anticipate each other's needs and thoughts, could work together with the efficiency of 2 people who had truly become one. At James's wedding when he was 21, marrying a smart, capable young woman named Catherine who reminded everyone of Zara at that age, Thomas and Zara danced together under the stars. The same stars that had shone down on them during their own simple wedding 26 years earlier, though now they danced on a larger stage with a more prosperous backdrop. "You remember our wedding?" Zara asked as they swayed to the music Daniel played on his guitar. "Every detail," Thomas said. "The way the firelight caught in your hair, the sound of your voice saying your vows, the feel of your hand in mine. I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive, and that feeling has never gone away." "We have built something good," Zara said, looking around at the celebration, at their children and friends and the life they had created. "Something that will last beyond us." "Because of you," Thomas said. "You took my simple ranch and made it a home. You took my loneliness and transformed it into a family. Everything good in my life started the day you arrived in that blizzard. And you warmed my frozen heart by the fire," Zara said softly, echoing the words she had spoken to him years ago. "You gave me everything I never dared to dream of having." They kissed, the passage of years having done nothing to diminish the affection and desire between them, and around them their family and friends cheered and applauded. James and Catherine built a house on the eastern section of the ranch, close enough to help with operations but far enough to establish their own space. Within a year, they presented Zara and Thomas with their first grandchild, a robust baby boy they named Thomas James. Zara held her grandson and marveled at the continuation of legacy, at how life circled and renewed itself through generations. Emma surprised everyone by falling in love with a veterinarian who had moved to the area from back east. He was educated and cultured, nothing like the cowboys Emma had grown up around, but he loved animals as much as she did and treated her with absolute devotion. They married when Emma was 20 and moved to town, where he established a practice that served ranches throughout the region. Sarah married a quiet, bookish man who taught at the new high school that had been built in San Bernardino. They remained in town, raising their children among books and learning, and Sarah continued teaching even after becoming a mother herself. Daniel did eventually travel to San Francisco to study music, but he returned home after 3 years, declaring that while the city had been exciting, his heart belonged to the ranch and the family he had grown up with. He married a girl from town who sang like an angel, and they filled the ranch house with music and eventually with children who inherited their parents' talents. Only Peter seemed restless, talking about seeing more of the world, about traveling east or perhaps even to Europe. Zara understood his wanderlust, remembering her own desperate need to escape the confines of her early life. She encouraged him to explore, to discover what lay beyond the familiar horizons, confident that he would find his way back when he was ready. The years accumulated, each one adding another layer to the rich tapestry of their life. Thomas's hair turned fully gray and then white, his body remaining strong but showing the effects of decades of hard physical labor. Zara's face gained lines and her dark hair silvered, but her eyes remained bright and her mind sharp. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th, surrounded always by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren as their family tree branched and expanded. Miguel passed away peacefully in his sleep when Zara was 52, having worked the ranch until just weeks before his death. Rosa followed him less than a year later, her heart apparently unable to bear life without her husband of more than 50 years. Their funerals were attended by hundreds of people whose lives they had touched, and Zara and Thomas mourned them deeply, feeling the loss of the people who had been with them from the very beginning. When Zara turned 60, Her children organized a surprise party that brought together people from every phase of her life in the West. Friends she had not seen in years traveled from across California to attend. Former employees and their families came to pay respects to the woman who had always treated them fairly and with kindness. Town officials honored her for her decades of community service. It was overwhelming and wonderful, and Zara cried happy tears while Thomas held her hand and beamed with pride. "You have touched so many lives," he told her that night after everyone had gone, and they sat together on the porch watching the sun set behind the western hills. "You came here as one frightened woman with nothing but courage and hope, and you transformed yourself into this pillar of strength that holds up an entire community. We did it together," she insisted, as she always did. "Everything we built as partners. Equal partners," he agreed. "The way it should be." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after decades of shared life. Zara thought about the long journey that had brought her here, about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. She thought about all the moments, big and small, that had added up to a life well lived. The births of children, the first words and first steps, the weddings and anniversaries and quiet evenings around the dinner table. The hard winters and scorching summers, the years of drought and the years of plenty, the losses and the victories. All of it had been part of the great adventure of building a life with Thomas, and she would not have changed a single moment. When Thomas turned 70, he finally agreed to step back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, turning over full control to James while remaining available for advice and consultation. It was difficult for him at first, letting go of the work that had defined his life for so many years, but Zara helped him find new ways to fill his time. They traveled more, visiting their scattered children and grandchildren, taking trips to places they had always wanted to see. They spent long afternoons reading together in the library, discussing books and ideas. They worked in the garden Zara had expanded over the years, growing vegetables and flowers side by side. One evening in early December, nearly 45 years after Zara's arrival in San Bernardino, a rare winter storm blew through the region, bringing with it heavy snow that blanketed the hills in white. Zara and Thomas sat before the fire in their bedroom, the same fireplace that had warmed this room since his parents built the house so many decades ago. They were both in their late 60s now, their bodies showing the inevitable wear of long years, but their minds remained clear and their love as strong as ever. "You remember the night we met?" Zara asked, watching the flames dance. "The blizzard and how frozen I was. How could I forget?" Thomas said, pulling her closer against his side. "You looked like you might shatter into ice if I touched you wrong. I remember thinking you were the bravest and most foolish woman I had ever seen, traveling so far to marry a complete stranger." "Not so foolish," Zara said. "Or maybe foolish in the best possible way. That leap of faith brought me everything I have ever wanted." "Me too," Thomas said quietly. "Before you came, this house was just a building, well made but empty. You made it a home. You filled it with love and laughter and life. You gave me a reason to build something that would last beyond myself." Zara turned to look at him, seeing the boy he had been beneath the lines and gray hair, seeing the strength and goodness that had first drawn her to him. "We did well, didn't we?" she said. "We took a chance on each other, and it worked out better than either of us could have imagined." "Better than I dared to dream," he agreed. He lifted her hand and kissed it, the same gesture he had made countless times over their decades together. "I love you, Zara Vance. I loved you when I carried you through the snow that first night, and I love you still, more with each passing day, just as I promised." "And I love you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. You warmed my frozen heart by this fire all those years ago, and it has stayed warm ever since because of you." They kissed, a gentle press of lips that held within it 45 years of history, of partnership, of love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white silence, but inside the fire burned bright and warm, a symbol of everything they had built together. The years continued, of course. Life does not stop simply because a certain milestone has been reached or a particular anniversary celebrated. Thomas and Zara entered their 70s together, their bodies slowing but their spirits remaining vital. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family that included 5 children, 23 grandchildren, and a growing number of great-grandchildren. Family gatherings required careful planning and enormous amounts of food, but they were joyous occasions filled with the noise and chaos that Zara had always dreamed of during her lonely childhood. The ranch continued to prosper under James's management, expanding and modernizing while maintaining the core values Thomas had instilled. James's children showed interest in continuing the family business, ensuring that the legacy would extend into yet another generation. Emma's husband had built his veterinary practice into one of the most respected in the state, and their children were following in either medical or ranching footsteps. Sarah's children had inherited their mother's love of learning, several of them pursuing higher education at universities in San Francisco and even back east. Daniel's children were musical, of course, filling the family gatherings with song and laughter. Even Peter, who had traveled extensively in his 20s, had eventually returned home to settle down, marrying a woman he had met in Denver and bringing her back to California to raise their family near the rest of the Vance clan. When Zara was 75 and Thomas 79, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a party that lasted 3 days and drew people from across the state. It was a testament to the life they had built, to the connections they had forged, to the impact they had made on their community and beyond. Speeches were given, toasts were raised, and stories were told, some of them even true. Through it all, Zara and Thomas sat together, holding hands, watching their legacy unfold around them with pride and deep satisfaction. 50 years, Thomas said during a quiet moment on the second day of celebration. Half a century since you stepped off that stage coach into a blizzard and into my life. The best 50 years anyone could ask for, Zara said. Every day with you has been a gift, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones, perhaps, because those were when we proved what we were made of. We proved we were made for each other, Thomas said. That was never in doubt, at least not for me. From the moment I saw you in that storm, I knew you were special. I just did not know how special, until I had the privilege of spending a lifetime discovering all the ways you would surprise and delight me. They sat together as the party continued around them. 2 elderly people who had earned their rest but chose instead to remain engaged with the world, contributing what they could for as long as they were able. They had built something that would outlast them, a family and a legacy rooted in love and hard work and the courage to take chances on each other. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning when he was 82 years old. He had been working in the garden the day before, helping Zara plant tomatoes, and had seemed his usual self at dinner. But his heart, which had beaten strong and steady for more than 8 decades, simply stopped during the night. Zara woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still resting on her hip as it had done for 53 years of marriage. The grief was enormous, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. After more than 5 decades of partnership, of never being truly alone, The silence of his absence was deafening, but she did not break. She had learned strength from a lifetime of facing challenges, and she drew on that strength now. She planned a funeral that celebrated his life rather than mourning his death. She stood before hundreds of people and spoke about the cowboy who had warmed her frozen heart by the fire, who had given her everything she never knew she needed, who had been her partner in building a life of meaning and purpose. "He was a good man," she said to the assembled crowd. "The best man I ever knew. He kept every promise he made to me, from that first day when he said he would provide for me and respect me, to our wedding vows about loving and honoring through all the years of our lives. He gave me a home when I was homeless, a family when I was alone, love when I thought I would never be loved. And because of him, I became more than I ever thought I could be." That is his legacy, not just in our children and grandchildren, but in every person whose life he touched with his kindness and integrity. After the funeral, after the guests had departed and the house fell quiet, Zara sat alone in the bedroom she had shared with Thomas for more than 5 decades. The fire burned in the fireplace, the same fire that had warmed her that first terrifying night. She looked around the room, seeing the accumulation of a lifetime together. The wedding ring quilt, now worn soft with age, still covered their bed. The photographs on the walls showed the progression of their years, from young and vigorous to silver-haired and content. His guitar stood in the corner, the strings now silent, but still holding the echo of songs he had sung to her and to their children. She allowed herself to cry then, deep-racking sobs that came from the very depths of her soul. She cried for the loss of her partner, her lover, her best friend. She cried for all the tomorrows they would not share, all the conversations they would not have, all the small moments of connection that had made up the fabric of their daily life. She cried until there were no more tears left, until the grief had been acknowledged and given its due. Then she dried her eyes and stood up, straightening her shoulders. Thomas would not have wanted her to give up on life just because he was gone. He would have wanted her to continue, to remain engaged with their children and grandchildren, to keep contributing to the community they had built together. She would mourn him, of course, for the rest of her days. But she would also honor him by living fully, by carrying forward the values they had shared, by being the strong woman he had always believed her to be. Zara lived for another 8 years after Thomas's death, remaining active and engaged until almost the very end. She saw great-great-grandchildren born, each one a new branch on the ever-expanding family tree. She taught her grandchildren and great-grandchildren about their history, telling them stories about the grandfather or great-grandfather they had known or never met, about the early days of the ranch, about the importance of hard work and integrity and treating people fairly. She continued her community work, contributing her wisdom and experience to various organizations and causes. On a December evening when Zara was 86 years old, the first snow of winter began to fall. It was rare for San Bernardino to get snow, even in the mountains, but the weather patterns had shifted and a cold front had moved through. Zara stood at the window of her bedroom, watching the white flakes drift down from the darkening sky, and she smiled. The snow reminded her of that long-ago night when she had arrived as a mail-order bride, frozen and terrified and desperate for warmth. It reminded her of Thomas coming out into the storm to meet her, of being carried into the general store, of sitting by the fire while sensation slowly returned to her numb limbs. She was tired now, bone-deep tired in a way that suggested her time was drawing to a close. She had lived a full life, longer than most and richer than many. She had loved deeply and been loved in return. She had raised children who were good people, who contributed positively to the world. She had built something that would last long after she was gone. She had, in short, succeeded in ways that the frightened 22-year-old girl stepping off the stagecoach could never have imagined. That night, Zara went to bed early, feeling unusually sleepy. She lay down beneath the wedding ring quilt that Thomas's mother had made so many decades ago, and she closed her eyes. In her dreams, she was young again, stepping off a stagecoach into a blizzard. But this time when Thomas emerged from the storm to meet her, he was also young, vital and strong as he had been on that distant winter day. He swept her into his arms and carried her not to the general store but straight to their ranch house, to the bedroom with the fire burning bright and warm. "I have been waiting for you," he said, his green eyes bright with love and welcome. "I have been waiting to bring you home." "I am home," Zara said, and she knew it was true. She had found her home in his arms 53 years ago, and now she was returning to it, to him, to the warmth and love that had defined the best parts of her life. Zara Zimmerman Vance passed away peacefully in her sleep that night, with snow falling softly outside her window and a smile on her face. Her children found her in the morning and mourned their loss, but they also celebrated a life well lived. They buried her beside Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch, where the view stretched for miles in every direction, encompassing everything they had built together. The ranch continued, of course, passing down through the generations, as Thomas and Zara had always intended. Their great-great-grandchildren worked the land and raised cattle, carrying forward the legacy of hard work and integrity that had been established so long ago. The house Thomas's parents built still stood, expanded and modernized but retaining its essential character. The fireplace, where Thomas had first warmed Zara's frozen body, still burned on cold winter nights, providing heat and light for yet another generation of the family. And sometimes, on rare December evenings when snow fell in the Southern California mountains, family members gathered around that fire told the story of how it all began. They told about the mail-order bride who arrived during a blizzard, about the cowboy who carried her through the storm, about how love grew between two strangers who took a chance on each other. They told about partnership and perseverance, about building something lasting through dedication and mutual respect, about how one brave decision could change everything not just for two people, but for all the generations that followed. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the years. It was the foundation upon which everything else had been built, the proof that sometimes the greatest rewards come from the biggest risks, that love can warm even the most frozen heart, and that home is not a place, but rather the person whose arms make you feel safe in any storm. The story of Thomas and Zara Vance became family legend, embellished perhaps in some details, but true in all the ways that mattered. It was a reminder of where they had come from and what they had overcome. It was inspiration for each new generation to build on what had come before, to honor the past while creating their own futures. Most of all, it was a love story, simple and profound, about two people who found each other against all odds and created something beautiful together. And on cold winter nights, when the fire burned bright and the family gathered close, you could almost feel the presence of those two souls who had started it all, still watching over the legacy they had created, still loving each other across the boundaries of time and mortality, still proving that true love, built on respect and partnership and genuine affection, really can last forever.